Lucy Brennan always believed that working hard and keeping her head down would be enough to build a solid career. At 27, she had achieved the position of senior accountant at Torres Development Group, one of Seattle's largest construction companies. What she didn't imagine was that her dedication and attention to detail would put her directly in the path of a dangerous man, and that her life would change forever on a rainy October night. Hello, my name is Rachel Ashwood, and this is just the first part of this intense story of revenge and redemption. If you're enjoying it so far, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share this video with your friends. Believe me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Lucy's journey is just beginning, and things are about to get much more intense. It all started when Lucy noticed inconsistencies in the financial reports. Numbers that didn't add up, bank transfers to offshore accounts, duplicate invoices from suppliers that seemed not to exist. At first, she thought they were simple errors, perhaps flaws in the accounting system, but the deeper she investigated, the more evident the disturbing truth became. Mark Torres, the charismatic CEO of the company, was diverting millions of dollars from projects destined for underserved communities. Funds that should build schools, community centers, and affordable housing were being channeled to tax havens and Mark's personal investments. Lucy spent weeks compiling evidence, secretly printing documents, photographing computer screens when no one was looking. She knew she needed irrefutable proof before taking the case to authorities. Mark Torres wasn't just wealthy and influential. He had deep political connections throughout the Seattle region. Judges, prosecutors, city councilors, all seemed to be on his payroll somehow. Lucy needed to be meticulous, because she would only have one chance to expose him. On the night of October 15th, Lucy was working late at the office, as she frequently did. The building was practically empty, just a few security guards making their rounds and cleaning staff on the lower floors. She was on the 12th floor, at her workstation, transferring the last files to an encrypted flash drive. Her heart was racing as the progress bar slowly advanced on the screen. 80%, 90%, 95%. That's when she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching through the marble corridor. Lucy froze. No one should be on that floor at that hour. She quickly minimized the windows on the computer and pretended to be reviewing common spreadsheets when Mark Torres appeared at the entrance of her cubicle. He was wearing an impeccable gray suit, but there was something different in his expression. The political smile he always displayed had disappeared, replaced by a cold and calculating look that made Lucy's blood run cold. "Working late again, Lucy?" he said, his voice too smooth, too dangerous. "You've been so dedicated lately, so curious about our special projects." Lucy tried to maintain composure, forcing a professional smile. "Just finalizing the quarterly reports, Mr. Torres. I want to ensure everything is perfect for next week's audit." Mark took a few steps toward her, his hands in his pockets, the relaxed posture of someone who had complete control of the situation. "You know, Lucy, I really appreciate dedicated employees, but there's a fine line between dedication and interference, and I have the impression that you crossed that line a few weeks ago." Lucy's stomach turned. He knew. Somehow, Mark had discovered her investigation. She quickly looked at the computer screen, at the flash drive still connected to the USB port, and then back at Mark. Before she could formulate a response, two enormous men appeared behind Mark, blocking the only exit from the work area. "No need to pretend, Lucy," Mark continued, now with a more threatening tone. "My IT department alerted me about your unauthorized access 2 weeks ago. I've been monitoring your every move since then. Every file you copied, every document you photographed, every email you sent to that anonymous account. Did you really think you'd be smart enough to take me down?" Lucy felt panic rising in her throat, but forced herself to remain calm. "You're stealing from people who desperately need this help. Children who should have decent schools, families who need housing. How do you sleep at night?" Mark laughed, a sound devoid of any genuine humor. "Ah, Lucy, so idealistic, so naive. You think the world works based on justice and morality? Let me teach you a valuable lesson about how things really work." He made a subtle gesture with his head, and the two men advanced. Lucy tried to scream, but an enormous hand covered her mouth before any sound could escape. She fought, kicked, tried to bite, but it was useless against the brute force of Mark's enforcers. They dragged her out of the office, through the empty corridors, to the underground parking lot where a black van with tinted windows awaited. Lucy was thrown into the rear compartment, her hands quickly tied with plastic zip ties that cut into her skin. A blindfold was placed over her eyes, plunging her into total darkness. The van began to move, and Lucy completely lost track of direction and time. She could hear the sound of traffic, then silence, then what seemed to be a gravel road. How much time passed? 30 minutes? An hour? 2 hours? When they finally stopped and the back door opened, the cold, damp Seattle air invaded the compartment. Rough hands pulled her out, and she stumbled on uneven ground, almost falling before being dragged into what seemed to be some kind of structure. When the blindfold was finally removed, Lucy needed a few seconds for her eyes to adjust to the dim light. She was in an abandoned warehouse, the kind of place Seattle had plenty of in the industrial areas near the port. Peeling concrete walls, broken windows, the smell of mold and rust permeating the air. Mark was standing in front of her, now without his jacket, his shirt sleeves rolled up as if he were about to perform some dirty work. "Welcome to your new temporary home, Lucy," he said, gesturing to the empty space around. "I hope it's comfortable, because you're going to spend some time here while you think about the consequences of your actions." Lucy tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. Mark approached, crouching to be at eye level with her. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to spend the next 48 hours here, thinking very carefully about your choices. You'll think about your mother, who lives alone in that little house in Tacoma. You'll think about your younger brother, who's in his second year at the University of Washington. You'll think about how terrible it would be if something happened to them because of your stubbornness." Tears began to stream down Lucy's face, but she forced herself to face him. "You won't get away with this. People will notice my absence. They'll look for me." Mark smiled, that fake political smile back on his face. "Oh, Lucy, I've already taken care of that. Your colleagues received an email from you tonight saying you needed a few days to deal with a family emergency. Your phone is sending signals from a cell tower in Tacoma, near your mother's house. As for your evidence, well, my IT department has already ensured that every file you copied was corrupted and deleted. There's nothing that can connect me to any irregularity." He stood up, wiping his hands as if he had touched something dirty. "Enjoy your stay, Lucy. My men will check on you periodically. Bring enough water and food to keep you alive. When I return in 2 days, I expect you to have learned the importance of loyalty and discretion." With that, Mark left the warehouse, followed by his enforcers. Lucy heard the sound of a heavy door being locked, then the engine of vehicles driving away, and then silence, an absolute and terrifying silence that seemed to swallow all hope. The first hours were the worst. Lucy tried to free herself from the restraints, but they only cut deeper into her wrists. She screamed until she was hoarse, but no one answered. The warehouse was clearly in an isolated area, far from any potential help. When exhaustion finally overcame her, she collapsed on the cold concrete floor, trembling from both cold and fear. But Lucy Brennan wasn't the type of person who gave up easily. As the hours dragged on, her mind began to work. She analyzed every detail of her situation, looking for any weakness, any opportunity. Mark's enforcers came to check on her every 6 hours, bringing bottles of water and granola bars. They never spoke, just observed for a few minutes before leaving again. Lucy began to count the intervals, mentally mapping their routine. On the second day of her captivity, something changed. Lucy was half asleep when she heard sounds outside the warehouse. They weren't the heavy footsteps of Mark's enforcers, but something different. Low voices, multiple, speaking in a language she couldn't fully identify, but that sounded like Italian. Then, the unmistakable sound of suppressed weapons being fired, bodies falling to the ground. Lucy sat up abruptly, her heart racing. What was happening? Was Mark returning early to finish the job? Or was it something completely different? The warehouse door burst open, and Lucy blinked against the sudden light that invaded the space. Silhouettes moved in the entrance, figures dressed in black, moving with military precision. A tall man entered, and even in the dim light, Lucy could see he was different from anyone she had ever met. He was perhaps 35 years old, dark hair combed back, a strong jaw and eyes that seemed to assess everything in a fraction of a second. He wore an expensive black overcoat over an equally elegant suit, and there was a natural authority in his every movement. "Lucy Brennan," he said, his voice deep and with a slight accent that confirmed his Italian origins. "My name is Alessandro Ricci. You're safe now." Lucy didn't know whether to feel relief or more fear. She had heard rumors about Alessandro Ricci, whispers in Seattle's business circles. He was the man who controlled much of the city's underworld, an organized crime leader who had consolidated power over the past 5 years, through a combination of strategic intelligence and calculated action when necessary. But what was he doing there? How did he know about her? Alessandro approached, gesturing to one of his men, who quickly cut Lucy's restraints. She rubbed her bruised wrists, still processing what was happening. "Why did you rescue me?" she finally managed to ask, her voice hoarse from disuse. Alessandro offered his hand to help her up, and Lucy hesitated only a moment before accepting it. "Because Mark Torres made the mistake of operating in my territory without permission," he explained, his tone casual as if he were discussing the weather. "He's been using construction projects as a front for money laundering operations that compete directly with my interests. I've been monitoring his activities for months, waiting for the right moment to act." He paused, his dark eyes studying Lucy's face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "When my men intercepted communications about you being taken, I realized Mark had made a fatal error. He gave me exactly the justification I needed to intervene." Lucy tried to process all of this. She had been rescued, but by someone potentially as dangerous as her captor. "And now? What do you want from me?" Alessandro smiled, but it wasn't a threatening smile. There was something almost respectful in it. "Now, Lucy, you have a choice. I can take you home, ensure your safety and that of your family, and you can try to rebuild your life. Or," he paused dramatically, "you can help me completely destroy Mark Torres, and in the process, ensure that he can never threaten you or anyone else again." Lucy looked at Alessandro, then at the armed men accompanying him, then back at the warehouse where she had spent the most terrifying 48 hours of her life. She thought about Mark, about his arrogance, about how he had threatened her family, about all the innocent people he had stolen from. And she realized she didn't just want safety, she wanted justice. She wanted revenge. "What do you need me to do?" Lucy asked, her voice now firm and determined. Alessandro smiled more widely, clearly satisfied with the answer. "First, let's get you out of here and take care of you. Then, we'll have a very interesting conversation about Mr. Torres's future." Lucy was taken to a luxury black SUV waiting outside the warehouse. As they drove away, she looked out the window and saw the bodies of Mark's enforcers scattered on the ground. She should have felt horror, but all she could feel was a strange sense of relief and anticipation for what was to come. Alessandro took Lucy to a private property in the hills east of Seattle, far from the curious eyes of the city. The mansion was impressive, with modern architecture that blended perfectly with the natural landscape around it. Large glass windows offered panoramic views of Lake Washington and the Cascade Mountains in the background. Lucy had never been in such a luxurious place, and the disparity between that environment and the filthy warehouse where she had spent 2 days was almost surreal. A middle-aged woman named Maria, whom Alessandro introduced as his housekeeper, took Lucy to a room on the second floor. The space was larger than Lucy's entire apartment, with a king-size bed, a private bathroom with a soaking tub, and a closet that could easily accommodate 3 people's wardrobes. Maria brought clean clothes, soft towels, and informed Lucy that dinner would be served in an hour, giving her time to clean up and rest. Lucy stood under the hot shower for almost 30 minutes, letting the water wash away not only the physical dirt, but also part of the emotional trauma of the past 48 hours. She examined the injuries on her wrists, the purple marks where the plastic zip ties had cut into her skin. Each mark was a reminder of what Mark had done, and each one fed the growing determination in her chest. When Lucy came down for dinner, she found Alessandro sitting in an elegant dining room with a polished mahogany table that could easily seat 12 people. He had exchanged his overcoat for a black cashmere sweater, looking more relaxed but no less imposing. He gestured to the chair across from him, and Lucy sat down, still a bit uncomfortable with the whole situation. "How are you feeling?" Alessandro asked, as Maria served plates of risotto with wild mushrooms and perfectly prepared filet mignon. "Confused," Lucy admitted honestly. "Grateful to be alive, but confused about all of this. You said Mark was operating in your territory. What exactly does that mean?" Alessandro took a sip of red wine before responding, his eyes never leaving Lucy's face. "Seattle has an underground power structure that most people never see. There are territories, agreements, unwritten rules that maintain a certain balance. Mark Torres decided he was above those rules. He started using his construction projects not only to divert public funds, but also to launder money from illegal operations that compete directly with my legitimate and non-legitimate businesses." He paused, cutting a piece of meat with surgical precision. "But it's not just about business, Lucy. It's about respect. Mark thought he could enter my territory, do whatever he wanted, and there would be no consequences. He was wrong. Lucy processed this information as she ate. The food was delicious, but she could barely taste it due to the tension that still permeated her body. And where do I fit into all of this? Why did you really rescue me? Alessandro smiled, and for the first time, Lucy saw something genuine in that expression. Because you, Lucy Brennan, are the key to destroying Mark Torres in the most effective way possible. You have intimate knowledge of his financial operations. You know where the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking. And more importantly, you have personal motivation to see him fall. He leaned forward, his intensity increasing. I could simply make Mark disappear. It would be easy, quick, efficient, but that wouldn't be satisfying. Not for me, and certainly not for you. What I propose is something much more elegant. We're going to destroy everything Mark built. We're going to expose him publicly. We're going to ensure he loses not only his freedom, but his reputation, his money, his power, everything. Lucy felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something seductive about the idea, a poetic justice that appealed to the part of her that was still furious and traumatized. How exactly would we do that? Alessandro leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. You're going to return to your life, Lucy. You're going to pretend nothing happened, that you really were taking care of a family emergency. Mark will think he succeeded in intimidating you into silence, but meanwhile you'll work with me behind the scenes. You'll provide me with information, access, everything I need to build an irrefutable case against him. Lucy shook her head slowly. Mark said he erased all the evidence I had collected. He has complete control over the company's systems. He thinks he does, Alessandro corrected. But I have resources Mark can't even imagine. Data recovery specialists, individuals who can access systems he believes are secure, contacts in federal agencies who would love to arrest a big fish like Mark Torres. You give me the information. I provide the means to use it. Lucy was silent for a long moment, considering the proposal. She was about to make a deal with an organized crime leader, something she never imagined doing in her life. But Mark had crossed a line when he took her, when he threatened her family. He had made this personal, and now Lucy wanted to see him pay for everything. All right, she finally said, her voice firm. I'll help you, but I have conditions. Alessandro raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. I'm listening. First, my family cannot be involved in this in any way. They need to be safe always. Second, when this is all over, I want to be free. No obligations, no debts, no ties to your world. And third, she paused, looking directly into his eyes. I want to be present when Mark falls. I want him to know it was me who destroyed him. Alessandro studied Lucy for a long moment, and then a genuine smile spread across his face. You have courage, Lucy Brennan. I respect that. Very well. I accept your conditions. Your family will have discreet protection 24 hours a day. When everything is over, you'll be free to live your life as you wish. And yes, you'll be there when Mark faces the consequences of his actions. He extended his hand across the table. Do we have a deal? Lucy looked at the extended hand, knowing that by shaking it, she was crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. But she thought about Mark, about his arrogant smile, about how he had laughed while ordering her abduction. She thought about all the families he had stolen from, about all the children who would never have the schools they deserved. And she extended her hand, firmly shaking Alessandro's. We have a deal. In the following days, Lucy was meticulously prepared for her return to normal life. Alessandro had an entire team dedicated to creating a perfect cover story. Photos were taken of her in Tacoma, near her mother's house, with timestamps corresponding to the period of her abduction. Phone call records were fabricated, showing conversations with hospitals and doctors about a supposed health emergency of her mother. Every detail was carefully orchestrated so that if Mark investigated, everything would seem legitimate. Alessandro also provided Lucy with a special phone, indistinguishable from a common smartphone but equipped with military-grade encryption, and a direct line to him. If you feel in danger at any time, press the power button 3 times quickly, he instructed. My men will be there in minutes. Lucy also received basic counter-surveillance training. A former intelligence agent named Marcus spent hours teaching her how to detect if she was being followed, how to communicate information securely, how to keep her cover story consistent under pressure. It was like being in a spy movie, except everything was terribly real. When Lucy finally returned to work at Torres Development Group, a week after her abduction, she was nervous but prepared. The office looked exactly the same. People typing on their computers, phones ringing, the coffee machine in the corner doing its constant work. But for Lucy, everything had changed. She saw the place with new eyes, aware of the rotten secrets hiding beneath the polished corporate facade. Mark was in a meeting when Lucy arrived, which gave her time to settle into her workstation and mentally prepare for the inevitable encounter. Her colleagues greeted her warmly, asking about her mother, expressing concern and offering help. Lucy smiled and thanked them, repeating the cover story she had rehearsed dozens of times. Her mother had had a health scare but was recovering well. Thanks for asking. It was mid-afternoon when Mark finally appeared at her cubicle. Lucy felt her stomach tighten when she saw his silhouette approaching, but forced herself to maintain composure. She looked up, feigning surprise at seeing him. "Mr. Torres," she said, her voice carefully neutral. Mark smiled, that fake political smile she now recognized for what it really was. "Lucy, good to have you back. I hope your mother is better?" "Yes, sir. It was a scare, but she's recovering well." Mark nodded, but his eyes studied her carefully, looking for any sign of defiance or fear. Lucy kept her expression neutral, neither too friendly nor too cold. She had learned from Marcus that the key to a good deception was believing it yourself, living the cover story so completely that it became your temporary reality. Great, Mark said, but there was tension in his voice. "Well, we have a lot of backlogged work. I hope you're ready to dedicate yourself. Always, Mr. Torres." Mark stood there for another moment, clearly expecting some different reaction. But when Lucy simply turned her attention back to the computer, he finally walked away. Lucy waited until he was out of sight before letting out the breath she had been holding. The first encounter had passed. She had convinced Mark that she was intimidated and submissive. Now the real work could begin. That evening, Lucy met with Alessandro at a discreet restaurant in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. They sat in a private corner, away from curious ears, and Lucy reported every detail of her day. Alessandro listened attentively, asking occasional questions, his mind clearly processing each piece of information. "You did well," he said when she finished. "Mark believes you're under control. That gives us the advantage we need. What's the next step?" Lucy asked, taking a sip of the wine Alessandro had ordered. "Now you begin to rebuild the evidence Mark thought he had destroyed. But this time you'll be more careful. My technology specialist, a man named Victor, will install special software on your work computer. It will be completely invisible to Mark's IT department, but will allow you to access and copy files without leaving traces." Alessandro slid a small USB device across the table. "Connect this to your computer tomorrow morning before logging in. It will install everything automatically in less than 30 seconds. After that, you'll have access to a hidden folder where you can store documents securely. Victor will be able to access them remotely without anyone knowing." Lucy picked up the device, feeling its weight in her hand. It was so small, but represented enormous risk. If discovered, Mark wouldn't be as merciful a second time. But she had made her choice, and there was no going back now. "There's one more thing," Alessandro said, his expression becoming more serious. "Mark has a meeting scheduled for next Friday with some of his business partners who are involved in the money laundering operations. I need you to find a way to access the conference room before the meeting and install listening devices." Lucy felt her pulse quicken. "Listening devices? Alessandro, I'm an accountant, not a spy. How am I going to do that without being caught?" "You won't do it alone," Alessandro assured. "One of my men, who will pose as an IT technician, will be in the building that day doing routine maintenance. He'll do the actual installation. All you need to do is ensure the room is unlocked and that no one enters while he works. 5 minutes maximum." Lucy nodded slowly. Each step took her deeper into this world of deception and danger, but it also brought her closer to seeing Mark pay for his crimes. "All right, I'll do it." Alessandro smiled, and there was something almost paternal in that gesture. "You're stronger than you imagine, Lucy. Mark made a fatal mistake by underestimating you." The following days were a mixture of tension and routine. Lucy installed Victor's software without problems, and began systematically rebuilding the evidence file against Mark. She was meticulous, copying not only financial documents but also emails, internal messages, anything that could establish a pattern of criminal behavior. Victor had created a brilliant system that backed up everything to secure servers in real time, ensuring that even if Lucy were discovered, the evidence would be protected. When Friday arrived, Lucy was so nervous she could barely eat breakfast. She arrived at the office earlier than normal, using the excuse of needing to finish urgent reports. The conference room on the 12th floor, where Mark's meeting would take place, was empty and locked, but Lucy had access to the electronic key system as a senior accountant. She checked the corridors, making sure no one was around, and then swiped her access card. The green light flashed, and the door opened with a soft click. Her heart was beating so hard she was certain anyone on the floor could hear it. Lucy quickly entered the room, leaving the door slightly ajar as Alessandro had instructed. The conference room was spacious, with an oval glass table surrounded by executive leather chairs. Large windows offered a spectacular view of Elliott Bay and the Seattle skyline. Under normal circumstances, Lucy would love that view, but now she could barely breathe properly. She pretended to be checking the presentation equipment, turning on the projector and testing the connection with the laptop, creating a legitimate reason to be there in case someone appeared. 3 minutes passed, then 5. Lucy began to sweat, wondering if something had gone wrong. Where was Alessandro's man? Finally, she heard footsteps in the hallway. A tall man wearing an IT technician uniform appeared at the door, carrying a toolbox and a tablet. He was about 40 years old, graying hair at the temples, and a completely bored expression that was perfect for the role he was playing. "Morning," he said with a casual nod. "Got a work order about audio system problems here. Are you using the room?" Lucy shook her head, forcing a smile. "No, just testing the equipment for a meeting later. Feel free." The man entered, closing the door behind him. The moment the door closed, his posture changed completely. The slow, disinterested movements were replaced by precise and quick efficiency. He opened the toolbox and removed tiny devices, no bigger than shirt buttons. In less than 2 minutes, he had installed 3 of them in strategic locations, one under the conference table, another behind the bulletin board on the wall, and a third inside the audio system itself. "Done," he murmured, returning to his casual posture as he packed away the tools. "Audio system is working perfectly now. Have a good day." He left as casually as he had entered, and Lucy was alone in the room, trembling slightly from the adrenaline. She waited a few minutes before leaving as well, locking the door behind her. As she walked back to her workstation, she passed Mark in the hallway. He waved absently, completely oblivious to what had just happened. Lucy could barely concentrate on work for the rest of the day. Every time someone passed by her cubicle, she jumped, certain she had been discovered. But the hours passed without incident, and when it was finally time to go home, Lucy felt a wave of relief so intense that her legs almost failed. That evening, Alessandro called her. "Excellent work today. The devices are working perfectly. Mark's meeting is tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon. By tomorrow evening, we'll have recordings of everything said in that room." "What if he discovers the devices?" Lucy asked, still anxious. "He won't discover them. They're cutting-edge technology, impossible to detect with standard scanning equipment. And even if by some miracle he found them, there's nothing connecting them to you. Breathe, Lucy. You did your part perfectly." Mark's meeting took place as planned on Friday afternoon. Lucy watched from her workstation as 3 serious-looking men arrived at the office and were escorted to the conference room. She recognized one of them from photos Alessandro had shown her, Dmitry Volkov, a Russian businessman with alleged connections to international criminal organizations. The other 2 were unknown to her, but their expensive clothes and confident posture suggested they were equally important. The meeting lasted almost 3 hours. Lucy tried to work normally, but her mind was in the conference room, imagining what was being said, what kind of criminal agreements were being made. When the men finally left, Mark accompanied them to the elevator, laughing and shaking hands as if they were old friends. Lucy felt nauseous watching him act so carefree, knowing what he really was. That evening, Alessandro asked Lucy to come to his mansion. When she arrived, he took her to an office in the basement, a room equipped with cutting-edge technology that looked like something out of a spy movie. Victor was there, a thin man about 30 years old, with thin framed glasses and fingers that flew over multiple keyboards simultaneously. "Lucy, sit down," Alessandro said, gesturing to a chair. "You need to hear this." Victor pressed some buttons, and Mark's voice filled the room through speakers. The audio quality was crystal clear, every word perfectly audible. Lucy listened as Mark openly discussed money laundering schemes, mentioned bribes to public officials, talked about eliminating people who became problems. He specifically mentioned Lucy, telling his partners he had dealt with a problematic accountant and that she wouldn't be a problem anymore. Lucy's hands trembled as she listened. It was one thing to know intellectually that Mark was a criminal, but hearing his voice talking so casually about illegal activities and violence was completely different. When the recording ended, She had tears in her eyes, a mixture of anger and validation. "Is this enough to arrest him?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Alessandro nodded. "This, combined with the financial documents you've been collecting, is more than enough. But we're not simply going to hand this over to the local police. Mark has many friends in the Seattle Police Department. Instead, we're going directly to the FBI. I have a contact there, an agent named Sarah Chen, who has been watching Mark for years but never had enough evidence. She'll love this." He leaned forward, his intense eyes fixed on Lucy. "But before we do that, there's one last thing we need. Mark keeps physical records of his most sensitive transactions in a safe at his house, documents he doesn't trust to digital systems. If we can get access to those documents, we'll have an absolutely irrefutable case." Lucy felt a shiver run down her spine. "You want me to break into his house?" "Not alone," Alessandro quickly assured. "My team will do the heavy lifting, but we need you there to identify which documents are relevant. You know his accounting system better than anyone. You can distinguish between ordinary paperwork and incriminating evidence in seconds. My men don't have that expertise." Lucy was silent for a long moment. Each step of this journey had taken her deeper into dangerous territory, but had also brought her closer to real justice. And now, she was being asked to cross perhaps the most significant line of all, breaking and entering, stealing documents, activities that would make her technically criminal as well. But then she thought about Mark, about how he had laughed while ordering her abduction, about how he had talked so casually about eliminating people. She thought about all the families he had stolen from, about all the lives he had ruined, and she realized she had crossed the point of no return long ago. "When do we do this?" she asked. Alessandro smiled, that predatory smile she was beginning to recognize. "Mark has a gala event next Thursday evening, something related to corporate charity. He'll be away from home for at least 4 hours. That's our window." The following days were dedicated to meticulous planning. Alessandro had detailed blueprints of Mark's house, an elaborate mansion in Medina, Seattle's most exclusive neighborhood, where billionaires like Bill Gates maintained residences. The property had sophisticated security, cameras, motion sensors, alarms, and 2 guards who made regular rounds. But Alessandro had resources that matched any security system. Victor had hacked Mark's security system weeks ago, giving them complete access to cameras and alarms. On the night of the operation, they would simply put the system on loop, showing recordings of a quiet night while Alessandro's team worked. On Thursday evening, Lucy found herself wearing completely black clothes, sitting in the back seat of a van with tinted windows, surrounded by 4 men from Alessandro's team. Alessandro himself was in the front passenger seat, coordinating everything through a tablet showing live feeds from Mark's security cameras. "He just left," Victor informed through the earpiece everyone wore. "System is on loop. You have a clear path." The van stopped a block away from Mark's property. The team exited silently, moving through the shadows with practiced precision. Lucy followed them, her heart beating so hard she was certain the neighbors could hear it. They reached the wall surrounding Mark's property, and one of Alessandro's men quickly set up a folding ladder. Climbing the wall was harder than Lucy had anticipated. She wasn't used to this kind of physical activity, and her hands trembled from both nervousness and effort. But strong hands helped her on the other side, and soon the entire team was in the meticulously maintained gardens of Mark's property. The house itself was impressive, a modern structure of glass and steel that was probably worth tens of millions of dollars. Soft lights illuminated the interior, but there was no movement. The guards were making their rounds on the opposite side of the property, exactly where Victor had predicted they would be. Alessandro led the team to a side door. One of his men worked on the lock for less than 30 seconds before it opened with a soft click. They entered, moving through a gourmet kitchen that looked like it had never been used, then through a living room with furniture that probably cost more than Lucy's annual salary. "The office is on the 2nd floor, 3rd door on the left," Alessandro murmured, consulting the blueprints on his tablet. They climbed a curved marble staircase, their steps silenced by a Persian rug that was probably a priceless antique. Mark's office was exactly what Lucy expected: masculine, opulent, designed to impress. Mahogany bookshelves lined the walls, filled with books that had probably never been read. An enormous desk dominated the center of the room, and behind it, embedded in the wall, was a large steel safe. "There it is," Alessandro said, approaching the safe. He gestured to another team member, an older man named Paolo, who was apparently a safe specialist. Paolo knelt before the safe, placing a medical stethoscope against the metal door. and beginning to turn the dial with precise and delicate movements. Lucy watched, fascinated despite her nervousness. She had seen this in movies, but witnessing it in real life was completely different. Paolo worked with infinite patience, occasionally stopping to adjust his position or wipe sweat from his forehead. 5 minutes passed, then 10. "How much longer?" Alessandro asked, his voice tense for the first time since Lucy had met him. "Almost there," Paolo murmured. "This is a sophisticated model, but…" Done." There was an audible click, and the safe door opened. Alessandro immediately began removing documents, stacking them on Mark's desk. "Lucy, come here. Tell me what's important." Lucy approached, her hands still trembling as she began examining the documents. There were contracts, property deeds, insurance policies, all kinds of paperwork that a wealthy person would accumulate. But then she found what they were looking for: meticulously organized folders containing records of financial transactions, names of offshore accounts, bank transfer numbers, all handwritten in an old-fashioned accounting ledger. "This," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "This is pure gold. These records connect Mark directly to all the illegal transactions. There are names here, dates, exact amounts. With this and the audio recordings, he's completely finished." Alessandro smiled, that predatory smile Lucy now associated with imminent victory. "Excellent. Paolo, photograph every page. We need digital copies of everything." Paolo quickly set up a small portable photography station, taking high-resolution images of each document. The process took almost 20 minutes, and with each passing second, Lucy became more nervous. They had been in Mark's house for almost half an hour. How much longer until something went wrong? As if the universe was answering her question, Victor's voice sounded urgently through the earpieces. "We have a problem. Mark just left the event. He's returning home. Estimated arrival time, 15 minutes. Lucy's blood ran cold. "What do we do?" Alessandro remained calm, his mind clearly working quickly through the options. "Paolo, how much more time do you need?" 5 minutes, maybe 6. "Do it in 3. Everyone else, start putting everything back exactly as it was. We can't leave any sign we were here." The team sprang into action, moving with practiced efficiency. Documents were replaced in the safe in the exact order they had been found. The desk was cleaned of any fingerprints. Lucy helped as she could, her heart beating so hard she felt like it would explode. "Done," Paolo announced, quickly packing away the photographic equipment. "I have everything." Alessandro closed the safe, turning the dial to randomize the combination again. "We're leaving. Now." The team descended the stairs quickly but carefully to avoid making excessive noise. Lucy felt her legs trembling as they crossed the living room again, heading for the side door they had entered through. They were almost there when they saw headlight beams illuminating the front entrance of the property. "He's here," Victor alerted through the earpieces. "Guards are opening the main gate." Alessandro cursed softly in Italian, something Lucy had never heard him do before. "Change of plans. We don't have time to leave through the front. We're going out the back, through the gardens to the rear wall." They exited through the side door, carefully closing it behind them, and ran through the dark gardens. Lucy stumbled over a flower bed, nearly falling, but strong hands caught her and kept her moving. Behind them, she could hear the sound of a car door being closed, footsteps at the front entrance. The back wall seemed to be miles away, although it was probably only 50 meters. Every second felt like an eternity. Lucy expected to hear alarm shouts at any moment, the sound of guards running after them, perhaps even shots. But the only sound was her own labored breathing and the muffled footsteps of the team running across the grass. They reached the wall, and Alessandro's men quickly formed a human ladder to help Lucy climb. She scrambled up awkwardly, her hands scraping against the rough stone, and then she was on the other side, falling into waiting arms. The rest of the team followed in seconds, and then they were all running down the dark street toward the waiting van. They entered the van, and the driver accelerated smoothly, not too fast to draw attention, but fast enough to put distance between them and Mark's property. Lucy collapsed on the seat, her heart still beating wildly, sweat running down her face despite the cold Seattle night. "We did it," she gasped, barely believing. "We really did it." Alessandro, sitting next to her, smiled and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You were incredible, Lucy. Many people would have panicked when Mark came back early, but you kept your cool and did your job." Lucy laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "Keep my cool? I was terrified, but you didn't let fear paralyze you. That's true courage." In the following days, Alessandro and his team worked tirelessly to organize all the evidence against Mark. The photographed documents were analyzed and cataloged. The audio recordings were transcribed. The financial records Lucy had collected were organized into a clear timeline showing years of criminal activity. When everything was ready, Alessandro made contact with FBI agent Sarah Chen. Lucy was present when Alessandro delivered the evidence. They met at a discreet cafe in downtown Seattle, away from curious eyes. Sarah Chen was an Asian American woman about 40 years old, with sharp eyes that seemed to assess everything instantly. She listened as Alessandro explained how the evidence had been obtained, carefully omitting the more unlawful details of the operation. "This is extraordinary," Sarah said, leafing through the documents on her tablet, where Alessandro had uploaded everything digitally. "We've been after Torres for 3 years, but he's always been too slippery. This here," she paused, shaking her head in admiration. "This is enough to put him behind bars for decades." "How long until you can act?" Alessandro asked. "We need to verify some things, obtain appropriate warrants, coordinate with the prosecutor's office. But if everything here checks out, and I have no reason to doubt it, we'll be arresting Mark Torres within 2 weeks." Lucy felt a wave of relief and anticipation. 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, everything she had worked for, all the risks she had taken, would finally result in real justice. Sarah looked at Lucy, her eyes softening slightly. "I know you've been through a lot because of this man. I want you to know we're going to make sure he pays for everything he did. Not just the financial crimes, but also the abduction, the threats, everything." Lucy nodded, emotion tightening her throat. "Thank you. That means a lot." The following 2 weeks were the longest of Lucy's life. She continued going to work, maintaining her facade of normalcy, while knowing that at any moment Mark's world would crumble. She watched him walk through the office with his usual arrogance, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to fall upon him. On the morning of a typical rainy Seattle Tuesday, everything finally happened. Lucy was at her workstation when she heard commotion coming from the executive floor, loud voices, quick footsteps, and then she saw federal agents with FBI vests entering the office. They moved with purpose directly to Mark's office. The entire office stopped. People stood up from their desks, looking with shock, as Mark Torres was escorted out of his own office in handcuffs. His face was red with anger and humiliation, and he was shouting something about lawyers and lawsuits. But the agents ignored him, reading his rights as they led him out of the building. Lucy watched from her cubicle, and for a brief moment, Mark's eyes met hers. There was recognition there, a sudden understanding that somehow she was involved in his downfall. His eyes narrowed with hatred, but then he was pushed forward, disappearing into the elevator. The office erupted in frantic conversations. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. The CEO, arrested by federal agents? What kind of charges could be so serious? Rumors began circulating immediately, each wilder than the last. Lucy silently returned to her work, a small smile touching her lips. She had promised herself she would be present when Mark fell, and she had kept that promise. That evening, the news exploded. All major Seattle networks were covering the story. "Prominent CEO arrested for massive fraud and money laundering," the headlines proclaimed. Details began to emerge about the extent of Mark's crimes, about the millions he had diverted from projects destined for underserved communities, about his connections to criminal organizations. Mark's reputation was destroyed overnight. Companies cut ties with Torres Development Group. Business partners denied any knowledge of his illegal activities. Politicians who had previously praised him now rushed to distance themselves from him. It was a spectacular and public fall, exactly as Alessandro had promised. But the story didn't end there. As the FBI investigation deepened, more people were arrested. Mark's business partners who had participated in the recorded meeting were indicted. Public officials who had accepted bribes were exposed and forced to resign. It was like knocking down the first domino, triggering a chain reaction that cleaned up an entire network of corruption in Seattle. Lucy was called to testify before the grand jury. It was an intimidating experience, sitting in that formal room and reporting everything she had discovered, everything she had experienced. But she did it with her head held high, her voice firm and clear. She told about discovering the financial irregularities, about being abducted and threatened, about the fear she had felt, and the determination that had kept her moving. Mark's lawyer tried to discredit her during the trial, painting her as a disgruntled employee with a personal grudge. But the evidence was irrefutable. The documents, The audio recordings, the bank records, everything fit together perfectly. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning with a guilty verdict on all charges. Lucy was in the courtroom when the sentence was read. Mark Torres was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for the first 10 years. He was also ordered to pay restitution of over $50 million to the victims of his schemes. When the judge struck the gavel, finalizing the sentence, Lucy felt something she hadn't felt in months: true peace. After the trial, Lucy met with Alessandro one last time. They sat in the same discreet restaurant in Capitol Hill, where they had planned so many aspects of their operation against Mark. "You did it," Alessandro said, raising a glass of wine and toast. "Mark Torres is behind bars, your family is safe, and you can finally move forward with your life." Lucy touched her glass to his, but there was sadness in her eyes. "I couldn't have done this without you. You saved me, gave me the resources to fight back, taught me I was stronger than I imagined." Alessandro smiled, but there was something melancholic in that expression. "You always had that strength, Lucy. I just helped you find it. But now, as per our agreement, you're free. No obligations, no ties to my world. You can live the life you deserve." Lucy nodded, knowing he was right, but feeling a pang of something that might be regret. In the weeks they had worked together, she had seen sides of Alessandro that few people probably saw. Yes, he was a criminal, a dangerous man who lived outside the law, but he also had a code of honor, a fierce loyalty to those under his protection, and a sharp intelligence she couldn't help but admire. "What will you do now?" Alessandro asked. "Honestly, I'm not sure. Torres Development Group is being dissolved, so I need to find a new job. But for the first time in months, I feel like I have options. I feel like I can breathe again. You're going to do amazing things, Lucy Brennan. I'm certain of it." They finished dinner, and when it was time to say goodbye, Alessandro surprised her by pulling her into a hug. "If you ever need anything at all, you have my number. Don't hesitate to call." Lucy nodded against his chest, allowing herself this moment of vulnerability. "Thank you, Alessandro, for everything." And then they separated, each going to their own lives, their own journeys. 6 months later, Lucy had rebuilt her life in ways she had never imagined. She had accepted a position as financial director of a nonprofit organization that worked to build affordable housing in Seattle, ironically doing the work Mark had pretended to do. She used her skills to ensure every donated dollar was used appropriately, that no family was cheated, that real good was done in the world. Her mother was healthy and happy in Tacoma, completely unaware of how close she had been to danger. Her brother was thriving at university, planning to graduate in engineering. Life had returned to something resembling normalcy, although Lucy knew she would never be exactly the same person she was before all of this happened. She had been tested in ways she never imagined, had seen sides of life most people never see, had made choices that haunted her on some nights when she couldn't sleep. But she had also discovered reserves of courage and determination she didn't know she possessed. She had faced a powerful man, and won. She had refused to be a victim, and had become a survivor. Occasionally, Lucy saw news about Alessandro Ricci. He continued to be a prominent figure in Seattle's underworld, although he always managed to stay one step ahead of the law. She sometimes wondered about him, about how he was, if he thought of her. But she never called, never tried to make contact. That chapter of her life was closed, and she was determined to move forward. One spring afternoon, Lucy was working in her office when she received a package by mail. There was no return address, only her name written in elegant handwriting. Curious, she opened it and found a single item inside, a framed photo of her and Alessandro, taken on the night they had celebrated Mark's conviction. She didn't even know someone had taken that photo. On the back of the frame, there was a handwritten note: "To the bravest woman I've ever met. May your life be filled with peace and purpose. Always your friend, A." Lucy smiled, tracing her fingers over the photo. She placed the frame on her desk, a reminder of everything she had overcome, of all the people who had helped her along the way, and of the strength she had found within herself. As for Mark Torres, he languished in a federal prison, his fortune confiscated, his reputation destroyed, his empire crumbled. He had plenty of time to reflect on his choices, on the greed and arrogance that had led to his ruin, and on his darkest nights, when the weight of his fall became unbearable, he thought about the young accountant he had underestimated so completely. Lucy Brennan, the woman who had refused to be silenced, who had fought back against all odds, and who had finally ensured he paid the price for his crimes. Lucy's story wasn't about revenge, although there were certainly elements of that. It was about justice, about refusing to be a victim, about finding strength when everything seemed lost. It was about discovering that sometimes to do what's right, you need to be willing to enter dark places and make difficult choices. And above all, it was about survival, resilience, and the capacity of the human spirit to rise again, no matter how hard it has been knocked down. 2 years after Mark Torres's conviction, Lucy was sitting on a discussion panel at a national conference on corporate ethics. She had become a respected voice in the field, speaking about financial transparency, whistleblower protection, and the importance of holding corrupt executives accountable. Her story, although she never revealed all the details, had inspired other people to speak out against irregularities in their own organizations. During a question and answer session, a young woman in the audience raised her hand. "Weren't you afraid?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "When you decided to expose your boss, weren't you afraid of the consequences?" Lucy paused, thinking carefully about her response. "I was absolutely terrified," she admitted honestly. "There were moments when I thought I had made the biggest mistake of my life. But then I realized something important. Fear is inevitable, but courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is feeling the fear and acting anyway because you know it's the right thing to do." She looked around the room, making eye contact with several people. If you see something wrong, if you witness injustice or corruption, you have a choice. You can stay silent and keep yourself safe, or you can speak up and risk everything. I won't lie and say it's easy. It's not. But I can say that when you finally see justice being done, when you see a corrupt system being dismantled, when you know your actions made a real difference in the lives of innocent people, it's worth every moment of fear, every sleepless night, every risk you took. The room erupted in applause, and Lucy saw tears in the eyes of several people in the audience. She knew her words had touched something deep, that perhaps she had inspired someone to find their own courage. After the conference, Lucy returned to Seattle and to her normal life. She had bought a small apartment with a view of Puget Sound, a space that was truly hers, where she felt safe and at peace. She had adopted a cat from a local shelter, an orange and furry creature named Milo, who greeted her every night when she came home. It was a simple life, but it was hers. And after everything she had been through, Lucy had learned to value simplicity, safety, peace. One autumn evening, 3 years after the beginning of this entire journey, Lucy was in her apartment preparing dinner when her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but something made her answer. "Lucy Brennan?" a female voice asked. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Jennifer Martinez. I'm an investigative reporter for the Seattle Times. I'm working on a series of articles about corporate corruption in Seattle, and your name kept coming up in my research. I would very much like to talk to you about your experience with Mark Torres and Torres Development Group." Lucy hesitated. She had given interviews before, but always in a limited way, never revealing the complete story. But maybe it was time. Maybe it was time to tell everything, to ensure the complete story was known, not just for justice, but so that other people in similar situations would know they weren't alone. "All right," Lucy finally said. "Let's talk." In the following weeks, Lucy worked with Jennifer to tell her complete story. She talked about discovering the financial irregularities, about being abducted and threatened, about finding help in unexpected places, about the long journey to bring Mark to justice. She omitted certain details that could compromise Alessandro or his organization, but told enough to paint a complete picture of corruption, courage, and redemption. When the series of articles was published, it caused a sensation. The Seattle Times won a Pulitzer Prize for the investigative work. Lucy's story was adapted into a documentary that was shown on national streaming platforms. She became reluctantly a public figure, recognized on the streets, invited to talk shows, requested for lectures at universities. But through all of this, Lucy remained grounded. She never forgot where she came from, never forgot the fear she felt in that warehouse, never forgot the people who helped her along the way. On a particularly cold winter afternoon, Lucy was walking through Pike Place Market, enjoying her day off, when she saw a familiar figure standing near a flower stand. Alessandro Ricci, wearing a black wool overcoat and scarf, seemed to be studying an arrangement of red roses. Lucy paused, her heart racing. She hadn't seen him in person in over 2 years, although she thought about him occasionally. For a moment, she considered simply continuing to walk. letting that chapter of her life remain closed. But then Alessandro turned his head, and their eyes met. A slow smile spread across his face, and he gestured for her to approach. Lucy hesitated only a second before walking over to him. "Lucy Brennan," he said warmly, and there was genuine joy in his voice. "You're well. Better than well, actually. I've been following your career. Very impressive." Lucy smiled, feeling strangely shy. "Thank you. And you? How are you?" "Surviving, as always. Staying out of trouble, for the most part." He paused, his dark eyes studying her face. "You look happy, Lucy. Truly happy. That makes me glad." "I am happy," Lucy admitted. "It took time, and there were difficult moments. But yes, I found my peace." Alessandro nodded, looking satisfied. "You deserve that. After everything you went through, after everything you achieved, you deserve every moment of happiness." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching people pass through the busy market. Finally, Alessandro spoke again. "You know, Lucy, when I met you in that warehouse, I saw someone who was broken but not defeated. I saw strength you didn't even know you possessed. And now, looking at you, I see someone who not only survived, but thrived. You became exactly who you should be." Lucy felt tears sting her eyes. "I wouldn't have gotten here without you. You gave me a chance when no one else would. Gave me the resources to fight back. I'll never forget that." Alessandro shook his head gently. "I only opened the door, Lucy. You were the one who had the courage to walk through it. Never underestimate what you did, the bravery you demonstrated." He looked at his watch, then back at her. "I need to go. Business, you understand. But it was wonderful to see you, Lucy. Take care of yourself." "You too, Alessandro." He started to walk away, but then paused and turned back. "Oh, and Lucy, if you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you still have my number. Don't hesitate." Lucy nodded, smiling through the tears now flowing freely down her face. "I know. Thank you." And then he was gone, disappearing into the market crowd, back to his world of shadows and secrets. Lucy stood still for a long moment, processing the unexpected encounter. Then she wiped away the tears, straightened her shoulders, and continued her way through the market. Life went on. It always did. And Lucy Brennan was finally living the life she deserved. A life built on her own choices, her own strength, her own determination to never be a victim again. As for Mark Torres, he remained in prison, a reminder that no matter how powerful you think you are, no matter how many connections you have, eventually justice finds its way, and sometimes that justice comes from the hands of the person you most underestimated. Lucy's story became legendary in corporate whistleblower circles. She was frequently cited as an example of why it's important to speak up, why it's worth fighting against corruption, no matter how impossible the battle may seem. Young professionals who discovered irregularities in their organizations often sought Lucy for advice, and she always made time for them, always encouraged them to do what was right, always reminded them they were stronger than they imagined. 5 years after Mark Torres's conviction, Lucy was invited to speak at the University of Washington graduation, the same university where her brother had graduated 2 years earlier. She stood at the podium, looking at the sea of young and hopeful faces, and felt the weight of responsibility for her words. "Graduates," she began, her voice clear and strong, "you are about to enter a world that is not always fair, not always kind, and does not always reward those who do what's right. You will face difficult choices, ethical dilemmas, moments when the easy path and the right path diverge drastically." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I'm here today to tell you that when those moments come, and they will come, choose courage, choose integrity, choose to do what's right, even when it's difficult, even when it's scary, even when it seems like you're alone against impossible forces." Her voice became softer, more personal. "I won't lie to you. Choosing courage has a cost. It can cost your safety, your comfort, even relationships. But I can promise that the cost of remaining silent, of allowing injustice to continue unchallenged, is much greater. That cost is measured in regret, in sleepless nights wondering, what if, in knowing you had the chance to make a difference, and didn't take it." She looked around the stadium, making eye contact with as many students as possible. "You are the future. You are the ones who will lead companies, govern communities, shape the world to come. And the world you create depends on the choices you make, especially the difficult choices, the courageous choices." Lucy concluded her speech with words that would become famous, quoted in countless articles and books in the years that followed. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is looking fear in the eyes and saying, "You don't control me." Courage is knowing you can be broken, but refusing to be defeated. Courage is getting up one more time than you've been knocked down. And above all, courage is believing that one person, one voice, one action can make a difference. Because it can. Because it does. Because you can. The stadium erupted in deafening applause. Students stood up, professors stood up, families in the audience stood up. Everyone applauding not just Lucy's words, but the journey she represented, the hope she embodied. After the ceremony, as Lucy was leaving the stadium, a young woman approached her. She was about 22 years old, wearing her graduation cap and gown, and there were tears in her eyes. "Sorry to bother you," the young woman said shyly, "but I just wanted to thank you. Your speech, your story, all of it, meant so much to me. I'm starting a job at an accounting firm next week, and I was nervous, worried if I'd be able to handle the pressure, the expectations. But hearing you today reminded me why I chose this path, reminded me that the work we do matters, that integrity matters, that one person can make a difference." Lucy smiled warmly, placing a hand on the young woman's shoulder. "What's your name?" "Emily. Emily Chen." "Well, Emily Chen, you're going to do amazing things. I can see it in you. Just remember, trust your instincts, stay true to your values, and never let anyone make you feel small for doing what's right." Emily nodded, wiping away tears. "I will. Thank you, Miss Brennan. Thank you for being an example, for showing that it's possible to fight against the system and win." As Lucy watched Emily walk away, she felt a deep sense of purpose. Her journey, as painful as it had been, had meant something. It had inspired others. It had made a difference. And in the end, wasn't that what everyone wanted? To know their lives mattered, that their struggles meant something, that they left the world a little better than they found it? That evening, Lucy returned to her apartment and sat on her balcony, watching the sun set over Puget Sound. Milo, her cat, curled up in her lap, purring contentedly. She thought about everything that had happened in the past 5 years, about all the people who had touched her life, about all the choices she had made. She thought about Mark Torres, rotting in a prison cell, his empire destroyed, his arrogance finally punished. She thought about Alessandro Ricci, still navigating his dangerous world, but always maintaining his code of honor. She thought about all the people who had been helped by Mark's downfall, all the families who eventually received restitution, all the reforms that had been implemented as a direct result of the scandal. And she thought about herself, about who she had been before all of this began, and who she had become. The Lucy of 5 years ago would never have imagined she would be capable of doing what she did. That Lucy was shy, kept her head down, avoided confrontations. But this Lucy, the one she had become, was different. She had looked evil in the eyes and hadn't blinked. She had faced her deepest fears and emerged stronger on the other side. Lucy picked up her phone and scrolled through contacts until she found the number Alessandro had given her years ago. She had never deleted it, although she had never used it since that last encounter at Pike Place Market. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment. Then she typed a simple message. "Thank you. For everything. I hope you're well. L." She pressed send before she could change her mind. She didn't expect a response, and that was okay. She just needed him to know she still remembered, was still grateful, still recognized the role he had played in her journey. To her surprise, her phone vibrated less than a minute later. "The pleasure was all mine, Lucy Brennan. You became exactly who I knew you would be. Live well. A." Lucy smiled, feeling a wave of warmth in her chest. Then she put the phone aside and simply sat, appreciating the moment, appreciating the peace she had fought so hard to achieve. 7 years after the beginning of her journey, Lucy received unexpected news. Mark Torres had died in prison. It wasn't violence, as some might have expected, but a sudden heart attack. He was only 53 years old, but years of stress, the loss of everything he valued, and prison conditions had taken their toll. Lucy felt nothing, neither joy nor sadness nor satisfaction. Mark Torres had become irrelevant to her life long ago. He was just a footnote in her story now, a closed chapter she rarely revisited. His death didn't change anything, didn't add or subtract anything from her life, but she attended the funeral, more out of curiosity than anything else. It was a small and sad event. Mark's wife, who had divorced him shortly after his arrest, was not present. His adult children, who had changed their surnames to distance themselves from the scandal, also didn't appear. There were only a handful of people, mostly lawyers and some distant acquaintances, who felt some obligation to attend. Lucy stood in the back, watching as the coffin was lowered into the ground. She thought about how powerful Mark had once been, how he had controlled so much, how he had thought he was above consequences. And now, here he was, being buried in a ceremony that barely had a dozen attendees, forgotten by almost everyone who once knew him. There was a lesson there, Lucy thought, about hubris, about the transitory nature of power, about how in the end, what really matters is not how much money you accumulated, or how much influence you wielded, but how you treated people, what kind of legacy you left. Mark's legacy was one of pain, corruption, and ruin. Lucy's legacy, she hoped, would be different. It would be one of courage, integrity, and inspiration. As she walked away from the cemetery, Lucy saw a familiar figure standing near a luxury black car. Alessandro Ricci, wearing an impeccable dark suit, watched the scene from afar. Their eyes met, and he nodded in silent acknowledgement. Lucy walked over to him, curious about why he was there. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said. Alessandro shrugged elegantly. "I wanted to make sure he was really gone. Men like Mark Torres have a way of resurfacing when you least expect it. But now, finally, this chapter is truly closed." "For you too?" Lucy asked. "For me too," Alessandro confirmed. He looked at her, his dark eyes soft. "And for you, Lucy? Is this chapter closed?" Lucy thought for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, closed, sealed, and filed away. I'm ready to focus completely on the future now." "Good." Alessandro smiled, and there was genuine joy in that expression. "You deserve a bright future, Lucy Brennan, and I'm certain you'll create it." They said goodbye once more, and Lucy knew somehow that it would probably be the last time they would see each other. Their lives had crossed at a critical moment, had intertwined for a specific purpose, and now were diverging again, each following their own path, and that was okay. Some people enter our lives for a reason, for a season, and are not meant to stay forever. The important thing was to recognize the impact they had, be grateful for the help they offered, and then move forward. 10 years after the beginning of her journey, Lucy was sitting in her office at the nonprofit organization she now led as CEO. The organization had grown exponentially under her leadership, now operating in 5 states and helping thousands of families find affordable and dignified housing. It was her life's work, her passion, her purpose. Her phone rang, and she answered to find a young and nervous voice on the other end. "Miss Brennan, my name is David Park. I'm an accountant at a real estate development company, and I discovered some irregularities, diversion of funds, falsified documents, really serious things, and I don't know what to do. My boss is powerful, has connections, and I'm afraid of what might happen if I speak up. But I also can't just ignore this. I read about your story, about what you did, and I thought, maybe you could advise me." Lucy felt a wave of déjà vu so strong it almost knocked her down. She was back in that moment, 10 years ago, when she was the scared person who had discovered something terrible and didn't know what to do. But now she was on the other side, the person with experience, with wisdom, with the ability to guide another person through the darkness. "David," she said calmly, her voice firm and reassuring, "take a deep breath. You did the right thing by calling. Now, let's talk about your options, about how to protect you and your family, and about how to ensure these irregularities are exposed the right way. You're not alone in this. I'm going to help you." She could hear the relief in David's voice when he responded. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I was so scared, so lost, and didn't know where to turn. I know exactly how you feel," Lucy said softly. "I've been exactly where you are now, but you're going to get through this, David. And on the other side, you'll be stronger than you ever imagined possible." As Lucy began to advise David, guiding him through the first steps of documenting evidence and protecting himself, she realized this was her true legacy, not just her own story of courage and justice, but her ability to help others find their own courage, their own strength, their own voice. The cycle continued. Courageous people inspired other people to be courageous. Acts of integrity inspired more acts of integrity. And slowly, one person at a time, one courageous choice at a time, the world became a slightly better place, a slightly more just place. Lucy Brennan had begun her journey as a victim, scared and alone in a dark warehouse, but she had refused to remain a victim. She had fought, she had survived, she had thrived, and now she was using her experience, her platform, her voice, to ensure that other people didn't have to face their battles alone. That was the true victory. Not just defeating Mark Torres, not just seeing justice being done, but transforming her pain into purpose, her trauma into strength, her story into inspiration for countless others. As the sun set over Seattle that evening, casting golden and pink tones over the city, Lucy stood at her office window and smiled. She had come a long way since that terrifying night in the warehouse. She had faced her demons. She had won impossible battles. She had found strength she never knew she possessed. And most importantly, she had learned that courage is not something you're born with. It's something you choose, moment by moment, day after day. It's the choice to stand up when it would be easier to stay down. It's the choice to speak when it would be safer to stay silent. It's the choice to fight when it would be simpler to give up. Lucy Brennan had made those choices repeatedly, even when she was terrified, even when it seemed impossible. And those choices had defined who she became, not just a survivor, but a leader, an inspiration, a force for good in the world. And as she turned back to her desk, to continue her work of helping David Park and countless others like him, Lucy knew with absolute certainty that every moment of fear, every sleepless night, every risk she had taken had been worth it, because in the end, she hadn't just survived, she had won, and she was using that victory to help others win too. And that, Lucy thought with a smile, was the best revenge of all. Not destroying your enemy, although she had done that too, but transforming your pain into power, your victimization into victory, and using your story to illuminate the path for others who were lost in the darkness. Mark Torres had tried to break Lucy Brennan. Instead, he had forged steel, and that steel now shone like a beacon of hope for all who needed courage to do what was right. Lucy's story wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who ever felt powerless, everyone who ever faced injustice, everyone who ever wondered if one person could really make a difference. The answer, Lucy now knew with absolute certainty, was yes. One person can make a difference. One voice can change everything. One courageous choice can trigger a revolution. And as the stars began to appear in Seattle's night sky, Lucy Brennan continued her work, knowing that somewhere, someone was reading her story, finding inspiration, gathering courage to make their own courageous choice. The legacy continued, the light continued to shine, and hope, that stubborn and resilient thing, continued to flourish even in the darkest places. And so ends the journey of Lucy Brennan, a story of courage, revenge, justice, and redemption. A story that reminds us that no matter how dark the night may seem, there is always hope. There is always a choice. There is always a way to fight back. If this story touched you, if it inspired you, if it made you think about your own choices and your own courage, then it fulfilled its purpose. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Leave your like if you believe that justice and courage still matter in this world. And subscribe for more stories that celebrate the triumph of the human spirit over adversity. I'm Rachel Ashwood, and thank you for joining me on this journey. Until the next story.